On Saturday, January 3rd, 2026, the Seattle Torrent and the Toronto Sceptres met for the first time in the 2025-2026 PWHL season. How did it go down? What other final scores panned out from the week of January 7th, 2026 to Sunday, January 4th, 2026? Stick with us. PWHL Recap, TD Coliseum, another PWHL Takeover edition of PWHL Recap starts right now. Welcome to Sports for Beginners. This is the show where I cover the Pittsburgh Penguins, Toronto Blue Jays, and take you on a journey through the world of sports from the fans' perspective. Here is your host, Scott McGregor. Let's have some fun. Hello, everybody, and welcome to PWHL Recap, another takeover edition of PWHL Recap. My name is Scott McGregor. Please call me Scott. On this episode of PWHL Recap, we're talking about the Seattle Torrent and the Toronto Sceptres. One of the first things to note here, this was the start of the 2026 season schedule for the PWHL. Toronto, coming into this game, was coming off of a loss to the defending Walter Cup champion Minnesota Frost, and entered this game with a record of 4 wins. They entered with a record of 4-0-2-3. It is kind of hard to pan out everything, even now since that game has gone final. But let's see. Toronto, at the time, was in 4th place in the league, and they currently are still 4th place. Oh yes, there we go. No overtime wins yet for Toronto coming into this matchup against the Seattle Torrent. They had lost 3 times in overtime, 4 times all told, and have yet to win an overtime game in overtime. It should also be noted that they also lost this game in a shootout. Seattle came into this game at a record of 3-0-1-3. They, like Toronto, haven't won an overtime game yet. They have lost once in overtime. They also have 3 wins, 4 losses, and 1 overtime loss. The shootout also counts as an overtime win or an overtime loss. Our head coaches for this matchup, Steve O'Rourke for the Seattle Torrent, and Troy Ryan for the aforementioned Toronto Sceptres. This game took place on January 3rd, 2026, and was part of a 3-game triple header. Yep, you heard me. A 3-game triple header. But who else was competing on a Saturday? We'll talk about that more in just a little bit. Why don't we get to our officiating crew for this game from inside of TD Coliseum in Hamilton. But first, keeping it back to the primer, these two teams will see each other again in late January, on January 2nd. From Seattle, Toronto was the host of Game 1, but that was down in Hamilton. It is likely Seattle could host Toronto in both times that they are the home team, or maybe one time that they are the home team, maybe in late February after the Winter Olympics this next month. Both of those games could either be at Climate Pledge Arena, or one of them could be at Climate Pledge Arena, and the other could be somewhere else. One thing's for sure, March 5th, that could very well, and I say could very well, be a game hosted in Toronto at the Coca-Cola Coliseum, which is also home to the American Hockey League, AHL for short, club for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Toronto Marlies. All right, with that said, before we go to the goaltending, let's get right to the officials. The officiating crew for this game, the referees would be Jack Hennigan, wearing the number 44. Wearing the number 48 would be Melissa Doyle. The lines person, as they call it in the women's game. We also have lines person, or linesmen rather, in our notes here. But we're going to go with lines person. They were wearing the number 63. Say hello to Jessica Chartran, and wearing the number 66 for this game as an officiating member and lines person, Sarah Buckner. I'm going to go with Sarah B. Those were your lines person and your referee officials for this contest, which took place 13 minutes after 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central, 11 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. in the UK, and 8 p.m. in Sweden and France as well. We'll get to the end time as well as the attendance record during our segment, of which we will talk about nothing more than the women's hockey player of the game, I shall say, and of course, the play of the game, and much, much more. But before we go to our first break of the program, we're going to get right down to business, starting with the goaltenders for Troy Ryan and Steve O'Rourke. All right, so let's start with Seattle's side of the ice. Going into this matchup, the Seattle Torrent would start former New York Siren Corrine Schroeder, who would wear the number 30. Meanwhile, the backup to Corrine would be number 83, Hannah Murphy. On the Toronto Sceptres side of the ice, they would start number 1, Reagan Kirk, and have her be backed up by number 29, a former member of the Montreal Victoire, in Elena Chuli. Elena, if I pronounce your name wrong, I apologize. Same as I will apologize for any pronunciation of names mispronounced during our scoring. With that being said, ladies and gents, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, how did the Seattle Torrent manage to beat the Toronto Sceptres in Game 1 of a 4-meeting series that will have 2 games in with Seattle as the host and 2 games as Toronto as the host, with Toronto, I should say, as the host. You'll find out how this game went down, including a shootout overview when we get back to PWHL Recap. Also, when we get back, we'll take a look at how both teams did in the shots on goal category, how both teams fared on the power play, and we'll also reveal our shootout overview. Those coming after we get right into the game with penalties to lead us off and scoring later. One thing to note here as we go to break, there were no overtime penalties and no scoring in overtime. The scoring from the first to third period and penalties when we continue. Stick with us. PWHL Recap will continue shortly. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
CNT Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down, nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on CNT Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on CNT Radio.
Hey everyone, it's Scott McGregor here. Join me weekly right here on Sports for Beginners. For weekly episodes, your weekly dive in around sports news surrounding the Toronto Blue Jays, Pittsburgh Penguins, Toronto Raptors, and more. We'll have guests on a week-to-week basis, and so much more. Lots of great conversations coming. Be sure to subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And with that, make sure to like our Facebook page, Sports for Beginners Podcast 87. Just type that into your browser, and you should be sure to find our Facebook page. We'll also provide bonus content. It's going to be a dull moment you'll never want to miss. Check out Sports for Beginners with me weekly for daily news around the sports league, surrounding my favorite sports teams and yours, and so much more. Until then, we'll see you at action time.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
Welcome back to PWHL Recap. PWHL Recap presents another Takeover tour on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. My name is Scott McGregor. I am the host of the show. And with that being said, there would be some time for us to do some stuff here, but we're going to get right back to it. As I mentioned, this is part of a 3-game triple header, which also featured the Minnesota Frost, Ottawa Charge, Vancouver Golden Eyes, and Boston Fleet. But we'll talk about them in just a little bit. When we last left you, we talked about the coaches, goaltenders, officiating crew, and of course, the start time. We did not touch on the attendance record or the end time of the game yet. We also didn't touch on who was shooting for Seattle and Toronto in the shootout. We will get to that in this segment in just a little bit. Before we do, want to also remind you that over the course of this segment, we will talk game stats as far as shots on goal, power play performance, and scoring as follows. Let us begin by going over the first period, second period, and third period penalties. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to take you to our Google Chrome, currently showing you the action from this great game that took place on January 3rd, 2026. I also have my notes up to help us out, just in case we don't get there. So the Seattle Torrent doing a pretty good job in the third period and first period, taking no penalties. But Toronto opens up our penalty summary with the only first period penalty of the game, as number 2 of the Torrent, Jessica Condas, receives a 2-minute minor for roughing at 11 minutes and 34 seconds in. By this time, Seattle has already taken a 1-0 lead. We'll get to how the lead eventually gets tied up, changes hands, gets tied up again, and leads to a shootout, discussing how this game ends in a 3-2 win, for the Seattle Torrent over the Toronto Sceptres. But moving on, second period we go for the penalty, and the Sceptres doing a good job of staying out of the penalty box as our penalty summary continues. Seattle this time, it's number 7 of them, of the Seattle Torrent, number 7, Lily Delandines. I'm going to go with Lily D. Sorry about that, Lily, if I pronounced your last name wrong. She is going to go to the box for cross-checking. It's a 2-minute minor penalty that she takes at the 13-minute and 8-second mark of the second period. Penalty in the third period came early at this current time. The score was tied up at 1-1 apiece. We'll get to how it all came about in just a few moments. In the second period, I should say in the third period, it was Hannah Baskin, number 10 of the Toronto Sceptres, receiving a 2-minute delay of game penalty at 2 minutes and 22 seconds of the third period. Now let's get to our scoring. The Torrent opened the scoring with number 78, Lexi A, scoring her second goal of this season. Michaela Grant Mentes with her third assist of the season. She is wearing the number 13. And the number 20, Mariah Keppel, picks up her first assist of the season. Seattle takes a 1-0 lead into the second period, with the goal coming at 5 minutes and 10 seconds. The goals did not change hands, and the lead did not change hands until the third period, but the Toronto Sceptres get even early second period. Again, the goal by Lexi A coming at 5 minutes, 10 seconds into the first period. Toronto would then take a penalty later at 11 minutes and 34 seconds, but no goal prevailed. All right, let's go to period number 2, the site of the Seattle penalty at 13 minutes and 8 seconds. 55 seconds into the second period, number 24 of the Toronto Sceptres, Natalie Spooner, picks up her second goal of the season. Emma Maltese, number 27 of the Sceptres, picks up her fourth assist of the season. Daryl Watts picks up her third assist of the 20, and Daryl Watts is the number 9 player for the Toronto Sceptres. She wears the number 9. She would score at 9 minutes and 51 seconds into the third to give Toronto the lead, but Natalie Spooner's 55 seconds into the second period, opening second period goal that they would hang on to and stay at until the end of the second period, quickly tied the game up at a goal apiece. Off we go to the third, where, as I mentioned, Daryl Watts already has an assist in this one. She's going to go ahead and pick up her 5th goal of the season at 9 minutes and 55 seconds in. This coming after the Hannah Baskin penalty for delay of game. Way after that, to the exact, because that penalty came at 2 minutes 22 seconds. At 9 minutes 55 seconds, Daryl Watts made it 2-1 Sceptres over the Torrent, with her 5th goal of the season. Blair Turnbull, her 3rd of the season, and Renata Fast, her 3rd of the season. The goal went to Daryl Watts, her 5th goal of the season, which made it 2-1 Sceptres. But before the dust settled in the third period, Alex Carpenter in the clutch forces overtime with her 5th goal of the season. Julia Gosling, 4th assist of the season. Anna Wilgren, her 3rd assist of the season. Anna wearing the number 5 for the Torrent. Julia Gosling, a former Toronto Sceptre member, wearing the number 88, and number 25 being worn by Alex Carpenter. Alex's goal at 15 minutes 39 seconds sends this game to overtime, but as we mentioned before the break, overtime, no penalties and no goals were scored, so off we go to a shootout. It's time for our shootout overview. The goaltenders, as mentioned in the opening segment, Corrine Schroeder for Seattle, Reagan Kirk for Toronto. Reagan would face Hannah Bilka twice and only be scored on by her once, but also on the lineup for the Seattle Torrent was Anna Wilgren and Alex Carpenter. For the Toronto Sceptres, who are facing Corrine Schroeder, they would send out number 19, Sarah H., Number 24, Natalie Spooner. Number 9, Daryl Watts. And number 42, Claire Dalton, all of which she stopped. But let's go round by round. Let's start with Sarah H. versus Hannah Bilka. Round 1 for Hannah Bilka. She beats Reagan Kirk to give Seattle a 1 for the Torrent. As for Sarah H., she is immediately stopped by the one and only Corrine Schroeder. Next to shoot would be Anna Wilgren, and she beats Reagan Kirk to score a goal to make it 2-0 Torrent over Sceptres in the shootout. Who do the Sceptres counter with? Well, they counter with Natalie Spooner. Corrine Schroeder's already 1 for 1. Can she be 2 for 2? She can, as she stops Natalie Spooner in her shootout opportunity. Next to shoot, Hannah Bilka. Second time Bilka's gonna shoot here. This time Reagan Kirk bounces back and stops Hannah Bilka, but now Toronto needs a goal. They're down to Daryl Watt, stopped by Corrine Schroeder, and now if Claire Dalton, after Alex Carpenter, doesn't score, the Torrent will win this game 3-2. Carpenter is stopped by Kirk, and then Claire Dalton takes the puck. She is stopped by Corrine Schroeder, and as a result, the Seattle Torrent win their first match against the Toronto Sceptres. The final score, as you will see here on our screen, Torrent 3-2. All right, let's keep things going here and get to our stats of the game. We will remind you when this game ended and what the records were coming out of this one as we approach our third and final segment, during which time we will reveal to you the 3 stars coming out of the opening of that segment. We will also reveal to you the play of the game, women's hockey player of the game, and get you set up for next time on PWHL Recap. But with that said, let's get to our shots. After the first 20 minutes of play, the Torrent were leading 14-6 for the game in terms of shots. The Torrent were still leading this game after the second period as they were outshot by the Sceptres 14-8. But for the game, the Toronto Sceptres were being outshot 22-20, despite the score being tied at a goal apiece after being in an area where the Sceptres found they had to bounce back and get this game tied before it could have gotten out of hand. In the third, the regulation time period, it was the Torrent coming out on top 39, and they were heavily outshooting Toronto 35-29, but the score was knotted up at 2 goals apiece. The Seattle Torrent win the shots on goal battle in overtime 4-0, as well as 1-0 in the shootout, because it was the one goal scored by the Torrent, mainly the goal scored by Hannah Bilka, that was good enough to give them the win of 3-2. Ultimately, the Toronto Sceptres finished being outshot 39-29 as the Torrent go on to win in the shootout 3-2. Both teams had penalties in the game, but it was the penalty kill that took care of business. The Seattle Torrent 0 for 2 on the power play, 1 for 1 on the PK. Toronto 2 for 2 on the PK, 0 for 1 on the power play. All right, folks, when we come back to PWHL Recap, we'll get a look at the 3 stars of this contest, get you a look at the standings, or in this case, the schedule, go right to our play of the game, and then it's time for the women's hockey player of the game. Plus, you'll find out who's up next on PWHL Recap, so be sure to stick with us. There's more PWHL Recap coming your way in just a matter of moments. Stick with us. Don't go anywhere. there's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
Hi, Scott. It's Ali here. I just wanted to mention that I'm really enjoying the show and I'm really enjoying what you're putting together. And I wanted to just say I'm enjoying being a part of it as well. So please keep up the phenomenal work and make sure you guys keep this podcast going because it really suits you well. I wonder if I could make it. It's almost getting to 8 o'clock p.m. and I am still a few more steps away from home to get to my computer to listen to CNT Radio's Cosmopolitan Culture Club. The best of the best music from around the world. Can't wait. I think I made it. CNT Radio, making your day brighter, one song at a time.
Take another look with Gerda Felix and Melanie Taddeo Malo, two powerful women of diverse backgrounds having genuine, unique, and uncomfortable conversations that everyone needs to have. Join Melanie and Gerda for conversations about what is missing from human connections.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
Welcome back to PWHL Recap. My name is Scott McGregor, the host of PWHL Recap on, yep, you guessed it, on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. We are going to get to the point of who's next for our coverage of PWHL Recap in just a little bit. But first, we continue our coverage of Toronto versus Seattle. In case you missed it earlier, this is the first of a 4-game set between Seattle and Toronto that Seattle won in a shootout. And one thing I forgot to mention was that this was the first ever PWHL game in Hamilton and the second straight Takeover Tour game for Seattle after playing last Sunday, a previous Sunday ago, in Dallas. However, for Toronto, it was the 4th Takeover game for Toronto, and all 4 have been in Canada, Vancouver, and Edmonton last season, also including Halifax. This just makes me wonder, how does this all pan out with a Torrent win? Well, we just talked about that before we went to the next break. But speaking of that, before we get back to business as far as the action, let's go to our 3 stars of the game. And then let's take a look at the schedule, which also featured 2 other games that, if memory serves me correctly, and I think it does, featured the Minnesota Frost against the Ottawa Charge and the Vancouver Golden Eyes against the Boston Fleet. Both of those games from Saturday ended in regulation. Before we get to the schedule, as far as what's gone down so far in January, let's meet our 3 stars of the Takeover Tour game between Toronto and Seattle. Of course, it's brought to you by its respective sponsor for the TV broadcasts that had the game on. We don't have a presenting sponsor for our show, so we're just going to reveal them to you. Here we go with your 3rd star, as we always would do, even on our Pittsburgh Penguins hockey recaps. That went to Seattle Torrent goaltender Corrine Schroeder, who made 27 saves on 29 shots, only allowed 1 goal. I should say allowed 2 goals, but so did Reagan Kirk. It was also Reagan Kirk who allowed the last goal, but that came in the shootout. Both goaltenders played 65 minutes, but it was Corrine who had a bit of a better night than Reagan did, giving her the third star. Your second star of the evening, or the day rather, this was an afternoon game. Just a reminder, the nightcap was the Golden Eyes and the Fleet, but we'll get to that in a second, as well as the other early window game, which was at 1 p.m. Eastern between the Charge and the Frost. The second star went to Toronto Sceptres forward Daryl Watts, and the first star to Torrent forward Alex Carpenter, who scored a goal and unfortunately didn't come up with any assists. 4 assists and 2 goals for both teams, registered 6 points for them both. Toronto had 2 players in the box and spent 4 minutes in the penalty box. Only one person went into the box for the Seattle Torrent, so they only spent 2 minutes in the penalty box. All right, we're going to get to the play of the game in just a moment, as well as our women's hockey player of the game coming up in just a little bit. That is our player of the game segment, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, we're not going to share a screen here, but I will have it around here for us as we look at it. Let's look at the opening month of January, which opened up the 2025-2026 regular season schedule for the PWHL, and it opened up with a bang. The New York Sirens defeated the Montreal Victoire from the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey, by a final score of 4-3 on Friday, January 2nd, 2026, excuse me. We're in 2026. We're out of 2025. In the triple header, Ottawa got things started with a bang, beating the Minnesota Frost 5-2 at TD Place in Ottawa on Saturday, January 3rd, 2026. It would be followed up by the Seattle Torrent beating the Toronto Sceptres at TD Coliseum in Hamilton, Ontario, 3-2 in a shootout, and capped off in another PWHL Takeover Tour game as the Vancouver Golden Eyes get a little taste of revenge from the Boston Fleet, beating the Fleet 4-3 at Little Caesars Arena in Motown in downtown Detroit. Over on Sunday, Montreal and Minnesota playing each other from Place Bell in Laval, and it would be the Montreal Victoire coming out on top 3-2 over the Minnesota Frost. After this game against the Torrent, the Toronto Sceptres would head home to play the New York Sirens on Tuesday night, January 6, 2026, and they fell in shutout fashion to the New York Sirens 2-0. Meanwhile, coming off their shootout win over Toronto, the Boston Fleet defeated the Seattle Torrent, so the Torrent went from a victory against Toronto to a loss against the Fleet on Wednesday, January 7th, 2026. They lost 2-1 from the Agganis Arena in Boston, Massachusetts. All right, folks, let's quickly go play of the game. We're going to make do with a fourth and final segment, setting up the scene for our next PWHL recap, as well as what you can expect to come on Sports for Beginners as we continue to count down to Season 5 of the show. Before we get there, however, let's get to, as promised, the play of the game and the women's hockey player of the game. Also coming up after this break, we'll talk about when this game ended and how long it took to complete in front of its attendance record that was in attendance for fans. All of that coming up in mere moments. First, let's go play of the game. And for me, my play of the game, it goes to Alex Carpenter of the Seattle Torrent. Quickly realized that they had a 1-goal lead. It got tied up, and then Daryl Watts took Toronto into the lead but Carpenter said, not on my watch. She forced overtime and then the shootout. And you know what? That was good enough for my play of the game. I thought it was a really great play. I will actually be rewatching this because I didn't actually watch the game, but I did follow as much of it as I could. And with that being said, let's get to our women's hockey player of the game before we take our final timeout of our show. And in doing so, we will be getting ready to set the scene for the next Seattle Torrent and Toronto Sceptres opponents, as well as who's up next in our 2025-2026 PWHL Recap season coverage. Reminder, in case you have not noticed, we are doing select games because it's easier that way and it's a little bit more fun. That way we could focus on as many teams as we can get to. Get a couple of expansion action in there as well. With that said, we got two women hockey player of the game, both on one side. Well, actually, one on each side. And the first one is going to go to Seattle Torrent goaltender Corrine Schroeder. I thought she had a pretty great game, despite giving up 2 goals, as did Reagan Kirk, which led to our overtime/shootout. But in the end, it was the goal in the shootout by Hannah Bilka that won them the game. And just to make sure they did win the game, Anna Wilgren also scored for the Torrent. But Corrine Schroeder is my women's hockey player of the game recipient for the Seattle Torrent. On the Toronto Sceptres side, we're going to go, at least I will actually go with, she had 5 shots on goal and scored a goal and an assist. Yeah, I'm talking about Daryl Watts. Daryl Watts had a pretty good game. And, you know, I'm actually glad she scored a goal. And I'm glad she put up an assist as well. Is there a lot to be unhappy with this loss for the Torrent? Or with this loss for the Sceptres? Not the Torrent. The Torrent won this game in a shootout. But the Torrent won the game in a shootout. But that's besides the point. Is there a lot to be happy about and a lot to be unhappy about? Well, depends on which fan base you are. To be honest with you, I think both fan bases could agree, despite the outcome of this game, it had its moments. Heck, we could have seen a jailbreak goal, which would have probably changed the entire trajectory of how this game finished. We could have seen a jailbreak goal. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, who's on deck on PWHL Recap? Who's on deck for the Torrent? Who's on deck for the Sceptres? How did the game end? Who scored? How did the game end? And where were the records heading in to their next showdowns? The team's next showdowns. Let's get that out of the way before we go to break. Well, the Seattle Torrent were 3-1, 1, and 3. Since then, they have lost 2 games. Since then, they have lost 1 game. So they are now 3-1, 1, and 4. The Toronto Sceptres have lost 4 games in regulation, including this one, 3 games in overtime, and are still looking for their first overtime win. They are also in good pace with wins. They have won 4 games, but coming out of this game, they were 4-0, 3, and 3. Seattle, 3-1, 1, and 3. They took on the 6-0, 1, and 2 Boston Fleet, who are now 7-0, 1, and 2. And Toronto took on the 5-0, 0, and 5 New York Sirens, who, as we speak, are now 6-0, 0, and 5, heading into their next matchups. Who is next for Toronto? Who is next for Seattle? You will find out when we return to PWHL Recap. And what's on the schedule for PWHL in general coming up. Be sure to stick with us. We wrap up this edition of PWHL Recap on the other side. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
Cianity Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down, nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on Cianity Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on Cianity Radio.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to PWHL Recap, our PWHL Takeover Tour edition of the show. It's like we just did this with Toronto and Montreal a little while back, and yeah, we did. That was also a Toronto Sceptre loss. The Victoire defeated Toronto 2-1. So the only difference between that game and this game against the Torrent is the fact that the Torrent scored 2 goals, as did Toronto, yet the result was still the same. Toronto ended up losing the game by 1 goal, and it happened to be a shootout goal. But hey, that means 5 goals were tallied, so we were looking for the team that could score the 5th goal of the game, but 3rd goal by said team in order to get the win. And in this case, it was Seattle who got the dub. So we are at the point in time in our show where we are setting the scene for our next PWHL recap. And before we get going, I want to touch on a few newsy items as of late, including news from around the league. Most recently, it was announced that on Saturday, April the 4th, 2026, the New York Sirens are set to host a game against the Seattle Torrent from inside of the home of the NHL's New York Rangers. That's right, it will be the Torrent versus the Sirens from the Big Apple at MSG. Why don't we dive a little bit into it? There's still a lot of news to get to, but we're just going to dive into one of the latest breaking news stories as announced by the New York Sirens, who the Seattle Torrent will see at MSG Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena, on Saturday, April 4th, 2026. Let's go ahead and take a look, shall we? I think we shall. By the New York Sirens staff. New York Sirens set to take the ice at Madison Square Garden on April 4th against the Seattle Torrent. This game will be the first time fans can attend women's professional hockey at the Garden. The New York Sirens of the Professional Women's Hockey League will host a home game at the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, on Saturday, April 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern against the Seattle Torrent. One of the promising quotes here from General Manager Pascal Daou says, Madison Square Garden has a storied women's sports history, and on April 4th, the New York Sirens will add their own chapter at the world's most famous arena as fans get the chance to attend professional women's hockey at the Garden for the first time. Playing at the Garden is an honor. Sharing it with our dedicated fans will make it even more special. New York doesn't just watch moments, it lives them, it lives with them. This is one of those nights meant to be experienced together in the building as part of the history of our team, our league, and everyone who helps bring it to life. The New York Sirens matchup against the Seattle Torrent will be the first PWHL game at Madison Square Garden, marking the Sirens' arrival to the epicenter of New York City sports, to the EP center, I should say, of New York City sports, and opening the doors for fans across the metro area to be a part of a historic moment. On February 28, 2021, Madison Square Garden hosted its first professional women's hockey game as the Professional Women's Hockey Player Association, PWHPA, hosted a Dream Gap Tour featuring Team Minnesota against Team New Hampshire. The game was broadcast live across the United States and Canada, though it was played without fans in attendance due to the COVID-19. Executive Vice President of MSG, Marquee Events and Operations, Joel Fisher said in a statement, Madison Square Garden has a rich legacy of showcase from the historic all-female boxing event featuring Katie Taylor and Amanda Soriano to Billie Jean King, Serena Williams, and Nadia Comaneci. We are excited to partner with the Professional Women's Hockey League and welcome the New York Sirens to the world's most famous arena for what promises to be an electrifying matchup against the Seattle Torrent on April 4th. So there you go. That brings up some interesting news for Torrent fans and Siren fans. Barring what's going on with the Blue Jays, guess what? I want to announce that at some point on PWHL Recap, we will cover that game between the Torrent and the Sirens. We will see if we can get a chance to cover that game, but it looks like something that we want to be a part of, so I agree. It's definitely an experience that fans from the New York area and metro area may want to take seriously, and who knows, maybe you want to be a part of the action. Okay, fans, time to set the scene. First, the Torrent and the Sceptres played this game at 2:13 p.m. from Hamilton inside the TD Coliseum, and it was in front of 16,012 fans in attendance. It took exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes to complete and ended 28 minutes after 4:20 p.m. Eastern, 3:20 p.m. Central, 1:20 p.m. Pacific, 2:20 p.m. Mountain, 9:20 p.m. in the UK, and over in France and Sweden, 10:20 p.m. Seattle with the victory. Who will they face next? Well, let's go ahead, and before we jump the gun into the upcoming schedule, let's go ahead and reveal to you Torrent hockey coming up in January, including their next showdown, which will take place on Sunday, January 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern, p.m. Central, 11 a.m. Pacific Time, p.m. Mountain. It will be from the Grand Casino Arena in St. Paul as they face off against the Minnesota Frost to close out a 3-game road trip to start the month of January. They picked up a victory against Toronto to start the new year off right, lost to Boston most recently, and now they will face off against the Minnesota Frost on Sunday, January 11th. 2026. They'll get the week off, but get back at it with Boston coming into town for a Sunday night action game on January the 18th at 10 p.m. Eastern. Fans in Canada can watch both this game and the Frost game on Sportsnet with coverage for the Fleet and Torrent beginning at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Pacific, and 2 p.m. Eastern Time on January 11th, 11 a.m. Pacific. You can also watch the game for Minnesota viewers on FanDuel Sports Network. And for the Sunday, the Torrent play the Boston Fleet. Viewers in the New England area, as well as anywhere in Massachusetts that has access, can tune into this game on NESN, the New England Sports Network. From there, Climate Pledge Arena will also host the Toronto Sceptres. This will be the second of 4 meetings between Toronto and Seattle. Game time available on Prime for viewers in Canada on Tuesday, January 20th. will be at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Pacific Time. From there, it's off to Denver, Colorado, and Ball Arena, the home of the NHL's Colorado Avalanche, as the Seattle Torrent will host the Vancouver Golden Eyes on Sunday, January 20th, live on CBC and CPC Gem on Sunday, January 20th on CBC. Game time 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Then on January 28th, Seattle will take on Ottawa. Fans in Canada can catch this one on TSN. And Seattle viewers, you can catch this wherever you are able to find your Seattle hockey action. As we stay on our shared screen, let's flip over to Toronto. Toronto has a little bit of a busier January. Of course, they lost to the New York Sirens on January 6th, 2-0. Their next showdown will be on Wednesday, January the 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern, when they will take on the Boston Fleet from the Tsonga Center in Lowell, Massachusetts. From there, they get some weekend action on January 17th as they host from the Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, the home of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we will have that game for you on that Saturday, January 17th, 2026, here on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. It's the Vancouver Golden Eyes and the Toronto Sceptres from the Scotiabank Arena in downtown Toronto. Game time is 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific time, and we will have that game for you. Then, as mentioned, on January 20th, a Tuesday, they will face off against the Seattle Torrent. Head over to the Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver for a showdown with the Vancouver Golden Eyes. Shortly after that, on Thursday, January the 22nd, 2026, And then from Place Bell in Laval, they will battle the Montreal Victoire at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 p.m. Pacific is game time. All right, what about everybody else? Let's see, we got some nice action coming up here on the upcoming action in the league. And previously, we saw Toronto lose 2-0 to the New York Sirens, and the Seattle Torrent lost 2-1 to the Boston Fleet. Up next, Vancouver will take on the Ottawa Charge tomorrow night, or tonight, whenever you're tuning into this. You probably are tuning into this tomorrow, as in Friday. The Vancouver Golden Eyes will face the Ottawa Charge on TSN. You can catch the game on TSN at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific from TD Place in Ottawa, Ontario. Speaking of Ottawa, they will play from the Scotiabank Center in Halifax against the Boston Fleet. Boston will be hosting Ottawa in this one, and the game time is at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, January 11th, 2025. So make sure you tune in there. 11 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Mountain is the timeline there. Then at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 11 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Mountain, you got showdowns between the Seattle Torrent and the Minnesota Frost from the Grand Casino Arena in St. Paul, Minnesota, as well as from the Videotron Center in Quebec City, the Montreal Victoire hosting the Vancouver Golden Eyes. Then next Tuesday, it's the Ottawa Charge and the Montreal Victoire on Prime. It's on Tuesday. It's only on Prime. Montreal Victoire and the Ottawa Charge at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific from Place Bell in Laval. All right, folks, that is going to just about do it for our show. But before we wrap it up, we will be back with you on Friday, January 16th, for that showdown on Friday, January 16th, 2026. On the next edition of PWHL Recap, which will be live from the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. Then after that, we are with you for Sceptres versus Golden Eyes on Thursday, January 22nd, 2026. Lots to get to, and lots to work, and lots to look at, but one game at a time, and one show at a time. As I said before, when we return to our next edition of PWHL Recap. We will be featuring the matchup from Friday, January 16th, 2026, between the Minnesota Frost and the New York Sirens. I'm your host, Scott McGregor. Thank you guys so much for being with us. We really appreciate you coming on to join us. If you like what you have been listening to, click subscribe if you really like what you are listening to, if it's on YouTube. And of course, subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you would like to get involved with our post-game show segments, like our game balls of the game for our football show, and probably a basketball show, which is in the works maybe, or our hockey show for our game puck of the game, shake of the game, women's hockey player of the game, etc. Play of the game also included for either show. And of course, in hockey terms, 3 stars also included as well. You can do so. The easier way to do it would be send an email to sportsforbeginners podcast8231@gmail.com. We also have a WhatsApp and Discord server active. Links to the Discord and WhatsApp group will be added in the description of this episode. But for now, until we talk again, ladies and gentlemen, for everything that I mentioned, I will talk to you next Friday after Minnesota Frost battle the New York Sirens. In the meantime, don't miss the Tuesday edition, I should say, of Bills Postgame, recapping everything that happened in Wild Card Weekend between the Buffalo Bills and then the Jacksonville Jaguars, as well as everything else that transpired. And stay tuned for updates, especially on recording shows like this one, because you never know when we will return to coverage of the Pittsburgh Penguins, but we will try to get it right back in there as quickly as we can. We're just trying to close down the barriers for all those shows, not the Edmonton show included, because we will do a brief summary of that first game between Edmonton and Pittsburgh on the second game of the Edmonton Oilers and the Pittsburgh Penguins, should we get a show like that to go on. I do want to leave you with this. The possible next Pittsburgh Penguins postgame show on Sports for Beginners and maybe on the ice and behind the benches will definitely be before the Winter Olympics. I can't give you a specific timeline now, but who knows? It could likely be one of the 4-game road trip coming up after this 2-game homestand, which begins tonight, and of course, short 1-game road trip following a game against Calgary this Saturday. But that is it for the PWHL hockey content. We'll catch up with you after Sirens and Frost. And until then, always remember, those of us that love hockey and also love women's hockey. I love me some women's hockey, to be honest. Always great to change up the game plan sometime, especially when it comes to hockey. But always remember, ice time earned, and hockey is indeed for everyone. We'll talk to you Friday, January 16th, 2026, after Frost and Sirens. Until then, I'm Scott McGregor saying we will see you then, and like I just said before, ice time earned. See you on the next edition of PWHL Recap. Sirens, Frost, next time on PWHL Recap. See you then. Thank you so much for listening to Sports for Beginners. If you would like to learn more about the show, you can visit the podcast Facebook page or visit the official website. You can also send us an email at sportsforbeginners podcast8231@gmail.com. As we always remind you, it is not goodbye, it is until next time.